Hello, everybody. We are now live on YouTube. So hello to everybody joining us there. And thank you very much for joining us for this evening's launch of Katie Griffiths' first collection, The Attitudes, published by Nine Arches Press. I'm Jane Kamain from Nine Arches Press, and the wonderful poets you can see on the screen with me this evening are all here to celebrate this brilliant launch of Katie's first collection. And we're absolutely delighted to be hosting this event tonight. Our wonderful collection of writers who are all joining us in celebration of The Attitudes come from Red Door Poets and Malika's Poetry Kitchen, and I'll be handing over in just a moment to Jill Abram, who'll be your wonderful host this evening. And bear with me, sorry. I just need to, mute myself for a second. So thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you're all in and join the event. And just to welcome our wonderful group of poets, we have this evening Michelle Penn, Arji Manuelpillai, Mary Mulholland, Matthew Paul, and Katie Griffiths. And our wonderful host, Jill Abram from Malika's Poetry Kitchen, who I will now hand over, who will be running tonight's wonderful event. Jill, take it away.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you to all of you, and welcome to all of you who've come to join this celebration, not only of the attitudes, but of poetry and poetry families. So I'd like to welcome Katie's actual family and many of her poetry families, not forgetting her first ever poetry family, Octavo. Of course, we've got Malika's Kitchen family, we've got Red Door Poets family. I'm sure there are lots of other families. So if you want to put in the chat, because we can't actually see who's in the YouTube, so you get that normal thing at events, go, oh, say who you are and where you're from, and do say also if you're in one of Katie's many families. So the way the session's going to run is I shall talk a little bit about Malika's Poetry Kitchen, and I shall read one poem and invite then Arji and Michelle to read. Then I'm going to talk to Mary a little bit about Red Door Poets, and she and Matthew will read, and then Katie will read, and before she does that, Jane will talk about her. And then at the end, we should have time for some questions for Katie. So if you would like to put those questions in the chat, you can put them in the YouTube chat at any time. And Angela from Nine Arches Press, she's keeping an eye on those. So she'll transfer those to me so that we can ask any questions we've got time for at the end. So thanks to Angela and to Jane, the wonderful publisher. Also, I'm sure you haven't missed how beautiful the cover of this book is, and all credit to that to the artist Anna Steinberg. She also did some illustrations, the cover and illustrations for Katie's Live Canon pamphlet, My Shrink is Pregnant. So big up to her, and I hope she's watching and listening as well. Thank you, Anna. So May 2014 was very significant for Katie and her poetry families because on the occasion of the last ever poetry residential course at Chateau Vontenac in the south of France, tutored by Pascal Petit, Mary Mulholland, Katie Griffiths and I all met for the first time. And I was running Malika's Poetry Kitchen and thought that Katie would be a really good fit for Kitchen. And so I invited her to join after that. And in case you don't know anything about Malika's Poetry Kitchen, first of all, where have you been for the last 20 years? But now I'm going to tell you. So it was founded by Malika Booker and Roger Robinson back in 2001. And they were young Black poets who were being overlooked by the poetry establishment because they were Black and because they were young and because they were thought to be performance poets. The establishment thought they couldn't possibly be crafting their work. So they got together and decided to create this community, which was very informal back then. It was just held at Malika's house. Now, I'll tell you a secret. It wasn't held in her kitchen because the kitchen was too cold. It was held in her bedroom. But if you call a poetry group Malika's bedroom, people are going to think something else. So Malika's kitchen it is, and that gives us lots of scope for puns and you know, cooking up poetry and things like that. So they gathered poets, underrepresented poets of all kinds, together to work on their craft. And 20 years later, what do we have? We have the two founders winning two of the biggest establishment poetry prizes. Roger Robinson won the T.S. Eliot Prize last year, and Malaika won the Forward Prize for the best single poem. And the influence of Malika's kitchen has gone across the nation, around the world. Rishi Dastidar, one of our members, an editor of our co-editor of our anthology, said that he believes that Malika's British poetry would not be in the wonderful state that it is if it were not for Malika's Poetry Kitchen. So if you want to know more about Malika's Poetry Kitchen, we have a website, and Angela's going to post the link to that in the chat. And we've also set up a newsletter just recently. So if you want to hear about other events that are coming up to celebrate our 20th anniversary and more details about our book, then you can sign up to our newsletter. It's on the website, and there's also a separate link. So enough talking, now to poetry. Katie's insisted that I read a poem, so I'm just going to read a little one for you. I don't really know why I chose this one. It's not really apropos of anything tonight. It's the one that I've had most recently published in Poetry Scotland, and I haven't read it for a while, so I thought it'd be nice to give it an airing. Not lost. I purged the silk purse, palpated the lining, scoured my handbag and the carrier bag. I hunted in the car, under all the seats, under the car, between the car and the house. I raked the purse and the bag again. I peered down into puddles and up at the clouds. I tried to sleep in case I'd only dreamt it. I went back to ask Dad if he remembered it, asked Mum if I'd ever really had it. I appended the underwear drawer, shook out my shoes, ransacked the laundry. Only one more place it could be. Ha 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 ha. And so now more poetry from our Malika's Poetry Kitchen brother, Arji Manuelpillai, whose pamphlet Mutton Rolls was published by Outspoken. I think Angela's going to put the chat for that in. Arji's been, he's probably had the best lockdown of everybody. He's been very productive. He has been running the Poetry Jam, which are fantastic workshops. You should look out for those. He has created Arji's Poetry Pickle Jar, which is a podcast in which he invites a poet to come and talk about a poem by somebody else, and they're wonderful conversations. And he's also been quite productive with his partner as well. And I think you can probably guess, I can't hear any baby crying in the background, but it could happen. What Katie has written about Arji's work is, I admire the energy and fearlessness with which, sorry, I'll start that again. I admire the energy and fearlessness with which Arji writes about identity, culture, and family. His poems run the gamut from satire to the deeply moving. There is a freshness and forthrightness in his voice that never shies away from expressing what otherwise might be difficult or taboo. So that's what Katie thinks about Arji's work. Arji, I think you might have something to say.
Yeah, well, I also wrote to you about what I said about Katie. I said, in my write-up, I said, if there was a burning building and all the poets were outside and I was inside, Katie is someone I can guarantee would come in, or at least suggest to come in and get me. So I'm really excited to be here for Katie Griffiths' launch. So super happy to be a part of it. My name's Arji, aka the leader, aka Monkey. Look at me, flying through the windows so the whole pub screams, smashing the bottles off the back of the bar, scattering pork scratchings on your good old days. Look at me, death staring that small child while I yank off the dartboard, frisbee it at the wisecrack just out the toilet, climbing the walls and sliding my red balls up and down the length of the TV so everyone can see these scarlet arse cheeks, so the pixelated Harry Kane makes that fingers on plate sound. Look at me bowling pool balls at old folks with older jokes about onion bargees, spearing the pool stick into your bulldog's butt. No, I will not keep calm and carry on. I'll rip the flag from the wall, swing circles on the chandelier, mane in wind, voice echoing with that joyful mantra of brown boys in the countryside. It's a pleasure to be here and to support this brilliant occasion. Going out to all the people from Malaika's past, present and future, and all the other poets who are in the chat as well. I'm actually writing a book at the moment, or a collection on radicalization and extremism, very light topic. So I'm going to read one or two from those. This is called, I'm writing a lot about surveillance, so I'm looking at how it feels to be watched. This is called Mistaken Identity. Imagine it, an IC4 that fits my description, not jacked up tight on a car bonnet, legs spread like a peace sign flipped. No. That's me right now. This IC4 is home building bombs in a damp flat in SE19. This one wakes up each day, mumbles sleepy in cat slippers and Christmas PJs to a local shop where a clerk mistakenly thinks he's a poet. Oh, hi, each day. Aren't you that poet each day? I get that all the time. Meanwhile, police are patting me down. It'll only take a second, they say. One day, he decides to visit Foyle's, and the cashier suggests Dickman, and so he reads it cover to cover, likes it so much he reads it again and again. He even begins writing his own poems. This one you're listening to now is actually his, and I am on my way into Primark on Oxford Street, body puffed up with C4. And I'm just going to read one more. I was trying to look at trying to make the situation talking about refugees or migrants something new, because it's quite difficult to write about. So a lot of the book deals with that, othering. So I'm really excited to share some of it. And this is the first time I've read these two. This is called Let's Just Call Them Butterflies. A boy, barely man, barely lucid, been barely outside in weeks, hopped up in laptop light like a train's perpetually passing by. A boy, barely man, nurturing an unhealthy obsession for butterflies. The way the wings flicker like God is, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. The way its caterpillar transformed super slow-mo saying, look, I'm so delicately precious. How quickly it veers to creating a kind of chaos. Here are the facts. Not in education or training, problems making friends, socially awkward. The next video will play in 5, 4, 3. You have to look for butterflies not in motion, just sat there, delicate as stigma, sipping honeydew nectar. Raise the net very slightly, no sudden movements, and 100 or so videos of butterflies being slammed on sills. Each clips a droplet of honey, each droplet curiously closer to a pair of tweezers, cold against a wing. Snap. If you like what you see, click subscribe. Rare butterfly washes up in Dover. Butterfly plague. The truth about butterflies. Killing a butterfly is easy. It isn't long before he cannot stop seeing it, there, in the space above the desk, dead, the centerpiece of a bedroom, framed. Every morning he'll wake up and say, I did it. I fucking got you. Thank you very much for having me, and congratulations, Katie.
Fantastic, Arji. Thank you so much. Oh, I just got this lovely image of all these butterflies, and then it was slammed together. I'm like, oh no, that's not the right image. Beautiful. I've been having a quick browse of the chat on YouTube to see who's out there, and Rishi and Dean Atta are taking roll call to see how many kitchen poets are out there. More news from the chat later. Meanwhile, more poems. Next up is Michelle Penn. Michelle also has a pamphlet out, Self-Portrait as a Diviner Failing, which won the Paper Swans pamphlet competition and was published as a result of that. What Katie says about Michelle's work is, I love both the delicacy and power in Michelle's work on display in, for example, her pamphlet, Self-Portrait as a Diviner Failing, where psychological states, narrative vignettes, and rites of passage help paint parallel pictures of segregation in South Africa and the US. Katie, trying to get me to read that just as well I put the right teeth in tonight, but I love the alliteration. Over now to Michelle Penn.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill. Congratulations, Katie. Congratulations, Jane. It's great to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this celebration. Since it's a big night for 9 Arches, I'm going to start with a poem that actually was published in Under the Radar about 4 years ago. And Katie, you get a poem later, but this is Jane's poem. It's called Office Politics. And of course, very few of us have set foot in an office in the past year, but I think a lot of us have the experience of dealing with sort of difficult colleagues. Office politics. The fence does not know it's a fence or how to be a fence. It thinks it's a cord of wood, miraculously upright, or perhaps a tree. If it reaches high enough, it will split to branches, leaves. Maybe it will even scratch the sky. It does not understand its job, protection, the partitioning of turf. It longs to be a flower, sweet-scented and plush. It checks its reflection in the nearest puddle, squinting to petals and stamens. It fancies itself a bird. It's certain it can fly. It's convinced of its song, takes its creaks and groans for arias. The fence disdains its role. It wants to be a wall, a monument. It waits for the wind to blow so it can refuse to bend. The next poem is sort of, I guess I would call it a bit of a linguistic dystopia. It's called The Gift. The ladder god hands me a cherry, says it's an apple, assures me it's been an apple all along. All signs point cherry, the swollen bulb of it, dark heart, planet in my palm. The ladder god says apple. Rungs hover in air. I bite through the cherry to prove I'm right. My chin drips with juice. The ladder god says, apple. The garden turns to pulp. Sort of staying with a slightly dystopian theme, which is not great for a celebration, but I guess it's still a little bit in the zeitgeist. The next poem is a pastoral, but there aren't going to be very many shepherds or happy sheep around. Pastoral. His love of heartbreak and the way snakes chew their skins. This air won't catch me. Things are really not okay. Umbrellas burn with rain. Cows build a column, hooves planted on backs, a tower of cows in the garden. Snakes chew their skins. Things are really not okay. Damp earth turns wax. Flowers explode on their stems. This air won't catch me. His love of heartbreak and vainest decay. He leers toward the sky at the waiting powder bed of the moon. And Katie, this one is your poem. I noticed that in your book you have all these wonderful titles, things like Scargazer and Soul Scammer. And I remember that once at Malaika's Kitchen, we had a workshop that you led in which you encouraged us to come up with rather unusual professions and write about them. So I'm dedicating this poem to you. It's my poem from that evening, and it's called The Water Reader. Water is a language you have to know by feel. There is no Rosetta Stone, no compendium of grammar. Every text changes before you can discern the meaning, and every meaning is slippery. It glides over your body, deciphering you much more thoroughly than you decipher it. Some water steams and burns as you try to grasp its message. Some hardens to ice, obscuring anything at all legible. Some is playful or cruel, foam flicking from waves, storm silt that blurs clarity while you stand knee deep, trying to snatch sound or significance. A puddle should be easier, but it's not. You can stare at it for hours, yet all you see is pavement, bottle caps and cigarette stubs. If you're lucky, a reflection of the sun. No one should ever interrupt when someone is saying something difficult. I am constantly overlooked. My life is spent straining to the burbles and trickles of rivulets, the clatter of waves on shingle, and especially the diaphanous notes of mist. When I kneel beside the fountain of a ruptured water main, the ignorant think I'm just drinking. The most difficult moments are when I perspire and risk contaminating a text. And what if, heaven forbid, a tear drips into a pond where I'm working? For that reason, I have renounced emotion. Reading water requires acuity of vision, speed of intellect, a keen ear. Most people believe water is without speech, not the first of the dangerous mistakes they make, and often. Congratulations again, Katie, and thanks everyone for listening.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. Mostly what we do in Kitchen is workshops. So, you know, somebody will lead a workshop and there might be some writing exercises and you might have, 10 minutes to read the poem and to write the poem, and we may, get to read it back. And also we do feedback sessions. So mostly all we hear of each other's work is work in progress or very early drafts. So it's wonderful to be able to hear more polished versions of that. Thank you so much, Michelle. More news from the YouTube chat. Katie, there's quite a number of the Chateau Vontenac crew in tonight, not least from Scandinavia, Martin Westman, and a big up for Meredith Pitt, who's not only attending all the way from Australia, but it's the middle of the night. I was messaging her a little while ago saying, are you coming? She's going, it's 4 a.m. or something like that. And I actually told her she was off the hook. So thank you so much for joining us, Meredith. And so Mary, as I said, Mary and Katie and I all met at Chateau Vontenac, and Pascal was the tutor on the course. And Mary, you were already doing some courses with Pascal, I think, and Katie joined them after that.
Yes, that's right. I started, my introduction to poetry was through Pascal at the Tate Modern. She ran workshops there in the evening, and it was just amazing to have the whole gallery of Gauguin or Magritte or something like that all to ourselves. And that's where I met Matthew, who's also reading tonight. and one or two others from the Red Doors. But Katie and you, of course, I met at Frontenac. I actually met Katie just before you because I was standing behind her in the airport queue. And Pascal came along, and so we had a little chat, the three of us. I had this feeling that Katie had to be a poet. She certainly had that aura around her. So
Yeah.
it was an amazing week.
And then, so Katie joined some of Pascal's classes that you were doing, but then Pascal left London. So then what happened?
Well, exactly. So following Frontenac, we all joined Pascal's advanced critical course, a workshop at the poetry school. And when Pascal announced she was heading off to Cornwall, we were a bit devastated. So I suggested we all met at my house, and I have a red front door, hence the name. So there are 9 of us, and we've been meeting there since then. So we go back quite a way. And a bit like Malaika's, we do prompts and workshopping, except that and we were meeting on a fortnightly basis with a short break for summer, Christmas, Easter. But since lockdown and coronavirus, we've been doing Zoom meetings, just as a sort of check-in and support thing, but also mainly workshopping. So we've sort of slightly dropped the prompt aspect for the time being. But
wonderful. And how many Red Door poets are there in total?
There are 9 of us. We are
9.
Chris Hardy, Elizabeth Horsley, Katie, obviously, Gilly, Robic, Hannah Busk-Nielsen, Matthew, of course, who's reading tonight, Beatrice Echeverry, Tom Cunliffe, and me.
Marvellous. I think they're all here. Certainly a lot of those names have popped up in the chat over on YouTube. I was really pleased just recently because Red Door Poets did a couple of readings which were wonderful, and each of the Red Door Poets invited a guest, so it was a really eclectic mix. It was wonderful. So you should definitely check them out, and if they do more, definitely join up. So we're going to hear some poems from Mary now. And what Katie's written about Mary is, I often feel when I read Mary's poems that I am on a kind of quest where both myth and the everyday can collide. She is as much at home writing about frankincense as sheep husbandry, always on a voyage of discovery for new insights that I, as reader, very much want to experience with her. So Mary, I think you also have an insight on Katie's work.
That's really lovely to hear. Thank you very much, Katie, and thank you, Jill, too. Yeah, Katie's poems, well, I first came across them obviously at Frontenac, and I was bowled over I was struck straight away by the mercurial quality and their aliveness. So I enjoy them both on the linguistic level with the wordplay, and on the content level because you're dealing with spirituality and really poignant emotional issues, and the way that they're never still but leap from idea to image while always having something. You can be confident there's always something very grounded holding everything together, even if it's a bit elusive and you can't get hold of it. So I have loved this book. I think it's amazing. I think it should be on everyone's reading list. So thank you, Katie, for that, and thank you, Katie, for inviting me to read at the launch of this book. It's such a privilege. So the first poem I'm going to read, the first couple of poems I'm going to read are based on material I've been putting together from my maternal family who came from Guyana. And facts that might be useful to know is that Kaitcha is the world's highest single drop waterfall. It's 4 times the height of Niagara, and the waters are said to be sacred, and that when I visited, there were no safety barriers. And the other fact is that the capital, Georgetown, being below sea level, has a seawall to protect it. Kaitcha of our ancestors. Thunder drowns the sound of swifts and golden frogs in tinnitus silence. Over the sandstone shelf, the Potaro drops 226 meters to grand applause as it forms a bridal gown. Last week, a girl of 20 wore that dress. She flew like a bird without wings, and no one, nothing could stop that marriage. Did her life flash before her with its commas and colons? Did she hold her breath? In the rush of her leap, 30 babies were born. 200,000 people had orgasms, and 12 people died, one of them her. And she has become one of my moments, alongside things I'd like to be rid of, yet keep, as if there's safety in holding on to the bad, even when it takes me to the edge. Here I stand, imagining my last 7 seconds. Shall I chant my name 3 times in prayer? Ask my mother why she couldn't share her past? They say to wash in these waters makes us whole. I'm not brave enough to jump. Or maybe I see hope in oranweed waving like mermaid hair at my feet. I should have said that the only relevance the poems I'm reading this evening have to Katie is that she is part of my workshopping. She's a workshopping guru, so she has seen just about everything I've written. And thank you. The second poem is called The Sea is Sleeping. When I wake in the night, I see a black mirror. I'm standing by the Georgetown seawall. In the waves, I hear you breathing. I'm thinking about the stories we make of our lives. Why, when even facts can be changed. My broken family, in the end, it is only the heart. Constitutionals in the botanic gardens, feeding the manatees fresh grass. Feeding your hen, your pet monkey. Rosa held your hand as rioters torched houses, yours spared out of their love for daddy. 7 father orphans in grandmother's care. At school, you were charity. You were all so poor, your mother abroad, they left food at your door. When you went to a government house party, you made your dress from curtains. On your father's headstone, the word regretted bled like a heart. Anger, fire in the heart. Sadness, a drowning heart. Fire and water should cancel each other, but you built your own seawall. And when you died, even your brain was still bleeding. Here, on the exposed silt shore, Diwali flags, Banks beer bottles, crisp packets, mud skippers. And I'll leave you with a poem that comes from a workshop that Arji ran a year ago. So thanks Arji for this, and thanks Katie for your workshopping on it. If today was circled in red, you might take notice and meet full on who's hiding, the way only humans do secrecy. And forget the elder tree with its banishing properties, rise up like a teenager reinvented. Watch the river pause in its race and stop searching for fragments of your face waiting at a bus stop suspended. Reach instead for a helium balloon shaped like a rose out of reach. And wear cherries as earrings, even if nobody eats them. They're all still listening to Revolution 9 on a loop. And don't bother that hopscotch has no answer, why sixpences are exiled to museums and plum puddings, or why you lost the letter from your mother but not the money she sent. From now on, rekindle your 10-year-old dream and give up walking backwards in galoshes as if life were just another fold in the paper. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary. I had the privilege of seeing Mary's poems. I think it was your portfolio from your MA at the Poetry School, and it was absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed that.
Oh,
More news from the YouTube chat. Katie, I think you know that your proud hubby is sitting in the next room, but what I didn't know was quite how many brothers and sisters-in-law you've got, let alone the fact that they're all there and saying hello in the chat. So wonderful. More poems. Matthew Paul, as you've heard, is one of the Red Door poets. His collection, The Evening Entertainment, is published by iWare. And what Katie says about Matthew's work is this. To me, Matthew's work is synonymous with precision, and it is not a surprise that he is, for example, a master of the haiku form. His poetry is beautifully crafted. Whether he is citing a poem in the natural environment or in a particular social context, his clear eye for intricate detail brings intensity and vividness to his work. Matthew, what would you like to say about Katie and her work?
Well, that's very kind of Katie to say those things. I would say very similar things about her work, to be honest. As soon as I met Katie in Red Door Poets, it was absolutely obvious that she was an incredibly talented poet, but she also works incredibly hard at her poems and crafts them and hones them. And I think you can see that in this fantastic book, just how beautifully polished her poems are. And the syntax is always gloriously precise, and the language is just beautifully, carefully considered. But the poem's also very funny. There's some just really hilarious lines in the poems, and that poem Syndex, right near the end, just cracked me up. And I've had the phrase "take it to the rankled streets" in my head all week ever since I've read the book. Anyway, yeah, so it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be part of Katie's big night, and thanks very much. So my first poem is called The Dice Box. The list of Bartholomew Marsh's creditors encompasses several senior ministers of his lordship Liverpool's government, an earl, a duke and 2 bishops. He places on the table for one last game of hazard a walnut dice box bequeathed by his uncle, Charles James Fox, inlaid with checkers of vibrant Baltic amber and Galician jet. The periwig setter decrees that Mr. Marsh can cast only after the loutish coxcombs brazenly hooting for his ruin are spent. Bartholomew chooses lucky 7 as his main, as the chances of its frequency are greater, albeit by the merest margin, than 5, 6, 8 or 9, and he nicks it, taking guineas off all comers. But fortune must always cease. Calling 6, he rolls 11 and throws out, forfeiting winnings, exhausting his credit. Chagrined by ridicule, he edges towards the light of the pinkening midsummer dawn, metamorphoses unremarked into a marsh fritillary, zips out with a rapier's swish above Pall Mall Place, disregarding debt, round and about like a spinning roulette, checkers of Baltic amber and Galician jet. Flying Ant Day. I'm boxed in a Victoria Line service, Vauxhall to Walthamstow Central. The person nearest me shucks pistachios with nails the shell's shape and colour, biting the nuts furiously and seriously. Winged ants have walked on board. Someone recounts a flight from Moscow to Uzbekistan, on which she had to stand for friggin' hours, riding the turbulence by clinging to dangling straps, like I am now. When they gave her lunch, she ate it cross-legged on the filthy floor. I flinch at my own memory, glimpsing from a district line train to Wimbledon, the scuttled face of a teenage boy pegging it onto the platform at Parsons Green, seconds too late, pursued by others dead set on mayhem and murderous affray. This poem's about the highlight of my childhood acting career, such as it was. It's called The 4 Sneezes. It's the opening night of First Old Morden Cubs, Snow White and the 28 Dwarfs. The 4 of us playing Sneezy replay a tag team bout from that afternoon's world of sport. The Royal Brothers, blonde-locked Vic and slap-haired Bert, Pile Drive Crab and Splash, our two favourite baddies, sleazy Kendo Nagasaki and Mick McManus off the Frosties advert. We grapple too far. Wearing an Everton mint-striped shirt like a wrestling referee, our Kayla, always so bright and breezy, calls us to order for one last run-through of our sneezing fit. The performance is a triumph, the Surrey Comet will write. They won't remark upon the principal doc's lank and greasy hair, but will mark him out as a star, ditto with Miss White. Later, as my brother Andrew and I, very rarely allowed out after dark, wait ages for the bus, are down and out, wheezy, wobbly and woozy, laughs like Muttley at my dwarf's hat. He's without doubt the jolliest old boozer we've ever met, plays peekaboo with a passing pooch, St. Francis of Assisi gone berserk, a taster of adulthood we don't want just yet. My next one's called On a Good Day, which by the sun rays tripping through the cumulus this could be, when my toes reach along and my heel presses down to finish the foothold, my thoughts sometimes wander to the possibilities of lunch, fine dining at La Pesca with the crew, or the remnants of yesterday's fennel risotto, and how I ought to buy a new pair of red and white wire walking shoes, custom made in Milan. But today, when I step out from the small door on the 31st story's breeze-blocked roof and balance upon the beautiful tautness stretching my mind, I sense after just my 7th tread, and know for definite on the 8th, that 3/4 of the way to the other side, the banshee winds which scrape my face would send me plunging like a gannet. So I devour consciousness as if it's the last and greatest meal of my life, arch my toes upwards and ghost the 8 paces backwards to a frosted shot glass of grappa. And I'm going to finish now with a poem about gardening. It's called Right Plant, Right Place. Mum grew the annuals, though polyanthesis brought her out in a measly rash. Dad nattered to the sweet peas and tilled 2 allotments in separate locations, the man with the golden trug. On Sundays, as soft as courgette flowers, he motored to Motspur Park, RHS, Blake's Lane, for bags of all-purpose compost, which squirmed through his pen pusher's fingers like corpses. From my bedroom, I could see the fruit trees. I dreamt that rhinoceroses climbed the yellow wallpaper, while under the Worcester pearmain, a woman reining a Rottweiler on a tight leash stared up and up at my window, at the blank white complexion of my halved apple face. Thank you very much. Please buy Katie's fantastic book.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm sorry, I missed part of the last poem because the man with the golden trug finished me off. That was so funny. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Matthew. And thanks to all our support acts, Arji, Michelle, Mary and Matthew. And now it's time for the main act of the evening. Dun, dun, dun. Katie Griffiths. And I'm going to hand over to Jane to introduce Katie. And Katie has been a member of the Nine Arches family for longer than just this book, hasn't she, Jane? I think you first came across her with primers.
We did. So I've known Katie since 2015 and actually published her in 2016 in Primers Volume 1. And it's been really wonderful today thinking about it's actually April this time in 2015 was 2016 was when we first published Primers Volume 1. And I remember still sitting with Catherine Maris, who was the selecting editor of that first volume, in the little front office at the Poetry School in Lambeth Walk, which will be familiar to many people, I'm sure, on tonight's event conversation in the chat in YouTube. And reading these fantastic poems, and there were a couple of images that just wouldn't leave me. And I always feel that when I read a submission or read a selection of poems and there are a couple of key images that just pull me in, and in fact one of those poems that really struck me and wouldn't let me go was one of the poems that's actually in the book, and it has this fantastic image of a priest and a character, the speaker in the poem, discussing a solar eclipse. And again, one of Katie's wonderful titles, The Priest and I Watch a Solar Eclipse Through the Safety of a Kitchen Colander. I mean, what a wonderful title. It's no wonder I couldn't forget those beautiful poems. So one of the real pleasures is as being an editor and a publisher is that you get to work with poets over a period of time and to see their work flourish and develop. And it's been such a pleasure to do that tonight and to hear all of the love and support and also the sense of community and warmth and generosity that surrounds Katie and her work from fellow poets who have been part of her story, also her Red Door poets, her Malika's Poetry Kitchen poets. And I'd like to say a huge thank you as well to Michelle, Arji, Mary and Matthew for your beautiful, beautiful readings this evening. It's felt very celebratory and that kind of real warmth. To bring that into the digital room is just wonderful. So thank you ever so much to our 4 brilliant guests. And I must also say a huge thank you, first of all, to Jill Abram, who is such a wonderful host. And it's one of the things I've really missed over the last year has been going to wonderful events that Jill runs in London, things like Stablemates or taking part in things at Ledbury where Jill compares. So it's lovely to have Jill as our guest host this evening. And also to my colleague Angela, who you won't see on this video call, but is doing lots of things in the background. She's there on YouTube. She's there looking after our audience there and feeding questions to us. So please, audience, wonderful people in YouTube, do think about questions you'd like to ask for Jill and for Katie in the next half of that event. After her reading, there'll be a short Q&A. I wanted also to say about the Attitudes itself, what an extraordinary book of poems this is. These poems are variously wisdom seekers, truth gazers, ghost encounterers, grief bearers, mind journeyers, lyric holders, stillness hunters, body embracers. These are fantastic poems, and I hope Katie will excuse me from taking inspiration in one of the forms of her own poems, as you will explore in the Attitudes in the poems in that book. But these are poems that also hold this really fragile and incredible Venn diagram between the body, the mind, and the spirit, that seek to address the complex interplay between all of those things. And there has a wonderful grace. I think Katie's writing amidst all of this variety also has such clarity, and as Matthew said, just an incredible precision. Her poems are effortless. They're fleet of foot. They sometimes outpace their readers and then circle back and surprise you in ways you really didn't expect. It's always very exciting to read new poems that Katie has been writing over the last few years, because I've just seen all of this develop and grow and flourish in her work. And her absolute grasp and ability to also interrogate difficult things, to come close to looking almost in great detail, almost microscopically, at experiences that are traumatic, such as loss, as grief, as death, eating and disorders, and the kind of a sense of loss and of the body and of all the things that entails. But also to have poems which are playful in a very serious and considered and beautiful way. Even the creation of the book itself is a work of joy, a work of perseverance, a work of persistence and love. She has, Katie has, even within making this book, created syndexes, addendums, additional notes on characters. So there is even play with the form of the book itself. The book becomes an artifact, an elegant and extensive concept. And I just think that's an amazing thing. It's almost like a hive full of wonderful poetry bees. And I feel like tonight we're kind of enjoying the honey from that wonderful, buzzing, beautiful, effervescent, living thing that is this book. So Congratulations, Katie. We are so proud of you. We're also incredibly excited to hear you read. And I'm not going to say any more other than say what a huge pleasure it has been to work with Katie. And you are really in for a wonderful treat. Thank you again to all of our guests. And now, please welcome Katie Griffiths.
How the body holds its comforts and suggestions, how it castigates and swelters, or hardens at night, tough as dirt. How it holds intent like extent, and by that, how it holds hope spread like a mat. How it thinks it is fixable, will lie on an operating table and soak sheets in piss, blood, and fight. Will take cure-alls and eat other creatures' organs. How the body nurses grudges, its intestines as trenches, a long voyage, contortions and turns. Food, it hits the mark, daily target practice. How the body is a hero's circle of infringements and hideaways, a sublime store. How it subsides under another's weight, only to crack and give up its open-mouthed children. How it holds daybreak until it can no longer. Oh, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Jane. It's an extraordinary thrill to be here tonight, launching the Attitudes and with all of you out there somewhere in the ether. But I have a lot of big thank yous to do. And first of all, Jill Abram for holding this whole evening together. And to Arji and Michelle and Mary and Matthew, thanks so much for your lovely poems, and thanks for being part of the launch team as well. The image of the book, as Jill said, the image on the front of the book, as Jill said earlier, is down to the talent of the wonderful Anna Steinberg. And in her honor, I am wearing images off the front cover. These are bickering selves, which you'll hear more about a little later. And then, of course, the team at Nine Arches, Angela Hicken behind the scenes and doing all the promoting, etc. And then, of course, Jane. What can I say about Jane? An editor extraordinaire, and it's been such a pleasure working with her on these poems. And she has inspired me and worked so wonderfully and effectively and brilliantly to help get these poems from where they were and in between these covers. So thank you, Jane, so much. Today is actually International Earth Day, and I'd like to read a poem called Earthmonger in honor of that. It was originally written as a poem in response to a poem by Rishi Dastadar, and his contained a fascinating word. Actually, it was a crunching up of 3 words. It's quite a Germanic thing to do. And his word was swing, lunge, burst. And from that, I coined wing, plunge, cursed, which was kind of a starting point, no longer in the poem, but wing, plunge, cursed made me think of how close we are all flying to the sun. Earthmonger, all your eggs addle in spring. The world you crawl towards is looking for shelter, not the distractions, portrait of yourself straddling a chasm, or reading 100 plants to see before they die. bagging one more bedeviled California condor, red-brown eyes closed to the unweather. But my little ammonite, coiled and ancient, my little armalite, sociopathic and sure, we go back a long way to one mating pair. Was it Lascaux, Genesis, or just vaguely the Pleistocene? Let them speculate. Let them fashion from your rib a comely robot who'll converse with you for 10 whole minutes. Earthmonger, everything slipping through your fingers. See the bags being packed. On the way out, the world smacks into you, leaves a mess on your jacket, the wing smear of something forever flying. So just before that poem, I was talking about new coinages or collisions of ideas and new words. One day I was reading an article about Médecins Sans Frontières, you know, Doctors Without Borders, the organization who often pop up in troubled spots of the world. And it occurred to me that the word médecin, doctors, also sounds very like mes saints, my saints, Médecins Sans Frontières, my saints without borders. So this set off a train of thought, and lots of playful notions came to mind, like Médecins Sans Chaumières, my saints without cottages, or Médecins Sans Épaulières, my saints without shoulder pads. But I landed on this title for a poem, which was Médecins sans cafetière, my saints without cafetières. Or for my lovely family who I hope are watching from British Columbia and Canada, cafetières being French, a French press, as you would call it. Médecins sans cafetière. Take it to the rankled streets. Saints must forego cafetières as a perk of their job. Coffee stains the teeth, and I prefer saints with pearly whites and their statues bird shit free. Though I've noticed saints with blots. Perhaps it goes with the territory, all those hurts. And how else to earn their keep, refusing to give up the monastery the way the rest of us refuse to go in. But a day imperiled by caffeine, vigils, espressos, lauds, cappuccinos, vespers, macchiatos. This cannot be. I shall raise the cry, Médecins sans cafetière. Saints must be deprived, or else I'm no more than a mug at their feet. Milk of the earth, the serpent is coiling, and the word cankering the leaves is latte, latte, latte. So I think many of us here together tonight with the launch team, I think we might agree that coffee is one of the mainstays of a writer's life. It's certainly been my mainstay all through my career, even when I was a freelance journalist. And speaking about the time I was a freelance journalist, just leading into the next poem, I actually once was trying to put together a piece for the Sunday Times magazine column, which is entitled Relative Values, where two family members in the public eye speak about each other, or perhaps even dish the dirt on each other. my interest at that time was in the French icon, the rocker Johnny Hallyday, and his son, David, who's also a singer and a record producer. So the interview with David, the son, took place and went well. But I kept on trying to ring at Johnny Hallyday and his people, but they never responded. So it never happened. But it's my great pleasure to say that Jane and I managed to sneak in a relative values piece into this collection. And this time, the two family members who are talking about each other are me and consciousness. As you can imagine, their relationship has been a bit off and on, a bit fractious. And a bit of background information is that me lives in a 1920s terrace and is an artist in naive ceramics and loves playing pontoon. And consciousness has never had to survive on fixed wages. So first up is consciousness, talking about me. So this is consciousness. Me never got over the custody battle I had with mind, nor how it made headlines at the time. I suggested a compensatory dog. Me named it Bishop, not for godliness, but for the diagonal moves. It's true we're often at loggerheads, like being locked inside a bathroom with no reason to come out. I'll give context, leave teasers. I support the projects me has nurtured since childhood. Yes, I enjoy skullduggery, and I'm perhaps too tickled each time me rages or rails. Still, I watch, I love, attentive as a wasp that noses sweet cups. Me can see through this and tries not to drink. And now me's turn to speak. It's a tussle. The thing is, consciousness always steps it up after catching wind of me, then keeps me awake all night, wondering which of us is exempt from burning out. Consciousness can be less inflammatory and lie stumm, like a ball of wool in a white basket. But if I try to level with consciousness, it's only to inhabit more fully the mirage. And what to do now consciousness has found the cubbyhole where I've hidden everything? There's no escape. Wrench off a wedding ring and the finger stays Ronald. Consciousness is the in-joke that swallows me whole. I think it's difficult to know, in fact, what the mind seeks or needs. A confidence in something, a belief in something, something to hold on to, maybe as gospel. It fascinates me. What can be trusted? What is faith? Where is faith? Is it necessary? I'm really intrigued. I have a real curiosity about the notions of faith and what they are, or what we could maybe call the tenets or the rules of faith. The next poem examines just that. However, it's called not the tenets, but the tenets of faith. The tenets of faith. A hair's breadth from eviction. Snitched by coffee mug rings on the chenille, putrid bins, not to mention knuckle prints on the bedroom plaster. No dispensation for having rid the kitchen of weevils. The absentee landlord has me by the small print. Think what luxury, even to be considered faith's, albeit deplorable, tenant. A much more temporary, let's say a cold collar on faith, pressing for a legible signature, or a doorstepper of faith, stalking its uproarious shindig. Faith should be forthcoming as hands cupping water, pliant as my body was that winter morning under its wedding dress. If it's tricky to know what the mind needs, sometimes it can be just as difficult to be comfortable in the body. A number of the poems in this collection deal with a difficult relationship with food, either overeating or choosing not to eat at all. These form a series or a thread that run through the book. Dough must not enter the body. Number 4. Her belly is the barometer she touches each day. It can be empty as a plundered well, a ransacked house of bickering selves, or full as a basket of laundry, a grain store for the unknown road, tight armor to fend off all blows. Mostly, her belly is a castle keep, her face at the window, disheveled. Dough must not enter the body. Number 6. The shadow inflates, the body negates. The shadow defies, the body decries. The shadow unclenches, the body blenches. The shadow is blessed, the body suppressed. The shadow in sun, the body outdone. I'd like to dedicate my last poem tonight to anyone who feels they might be living in a dark place at this moment, or feels maybe there's a dark place in their psyche. So I dedicate it to you with lots of love. It's called Moon Bather. Moon Bather. She is slink and fall, a trespass in the orchard that wrong foots the trees. Her darkness is famished. She needs the kind of moon you grind in your teeth, the kind of moon that never consoles. How she wants to feel sorry for you, feeling sorry for her, and all the light you fail to exchange. Under somber whims, her reason is permeable. See how readily she strips down and becomes moonlogged, innermost and full of retraction. She wants the kind of moon that saturates, the kind that rains calamitous pieces. Will you try to save her? Of course. You'll drop footholds and rungs. You'll call from your sill, sister, sister, shake out your limbs. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and congratulations. It's a fabulous book, and not only the poem's wonderful, but what another Malika's Kitchen member, Sarah Riley, used to say, your segues between the poems also really wonderful. There's a lot of love in the YouTube chat for the earrings. For coffee in general, I think. For the subtitles, I think there's at least 3 people in the chat going to make a fan poem out of the subtitles of tonight's session. And of course for the poems, and of course for you. And in particular, a lot of people commenting on the playfulness, which, you know, anybody who can call a poem Up Yours Wittenberg definitely shows playfulness. And I may be an atheist Jew, but I did notice in your title poem, The Attitudes, the similarity with the Beatitudes, and I noticed that platitudes slip in at the end. So tell me about the title poem and why it's the title poem, why it's the title of the collection.
Well, that was a discussion with Jane, of course, and we both agreed on that. But I think the attitudes, because I think a lot of what I'm trying to do in this book, whether it comes off or not, is to examine mindsets or perception. You know, everything is down to perception, isn't it? Black and white and dichotomies, etc. You go one way or you go the other. It's down to your perception and what pulls you that way. So attitude is a good word to describe that. I love words that end in T-U-D-E. I did actually ask Jane whether we could call this the ineptitudes or the inexactitudes, but I think that got vetoed. So yes, and the fact that there is a resonance with the biblical Beatitudes, because there's, I think, quite a lot in the book that deals with, you know, searching for faith, or what is faith. You know, do we want it? That's quite relevant as well.
Yeah, and Sue Burgess also picked up on this. She says the poems are so stunningly original in their wordplay. I wonder if you had any particular poetic influences who manipulate language in a way that inspired you.
Oh, that's such a good question, and I'm not sure about particular influences, because I keep reading many poets, and you're always sort of learning from them and being inspired by them. I love, I mean, wordplay. I always have to go back to Sylvia Plath, for example, someone who plays around a lot with register. I mean, she's someone who I absolutely adore her, and she will have very highfalutin words, and then have them inside and beside very everyday expressions. So these sorts of collisions, you know, I began to notice that with her. Someone whose wordplay I do love a lot, sort of quite currently, is actually the wonderful Geraldine Clarkson, who was published by Nine Arches last year. I love her work, but there are many poets I admire.
And that. She was a Primers One poet with you as well, wasn't she?
We were between the covers together.
Yeah, lovely. We're going to have a couple more questions and then ask you to read one more poem. So you were talking about working with Jane, and Dean Atta wants to know how you know when your poetry collection is done. How much of it is your editor telling you it's ready, and how much is instinct, a deeper knowing?
Oh, wow. So I think that maybe that needs to be asked to Jane. I think I can't speak for everything, but in this case, I know that there were quite a few poems that hit the cutting room floor, and that was fine, because once that happened, and then I looked at the group of poems that we were left with, and could sort of see them through Jane's eye, then that seemed right. I think it's so important that there's another person coming in, because you can get quite blinkered, I think, with your own work. So I think Jane was fantastic in being maybe a little bit ruthless at the beginning, but I loved it. I loved that process. It was so good. It was so good. So my advice to anybody would be is have plenty more than you think you're going to need, because then you've got the ones that are going to go on the cutting room floor.
Yes, they don't call her the tiny poetry matriarch for nothing, do they? So we'll have one more question and then one more poem. And this question is from Michael Dench, and it kind of brings us back to the poem that you've told me you're going to read. He asks, what's the relationship, if you think there is one, between faith and poetry?
Ooh, thank you, Michael, for that wonderful question. That could be answered in many different ways, but faith and poetry, I feel that and Caroline Bird is a great exponent of this, a wonderful poet, Caroline Bird, who talks about sort of not knowing where you're going when you start a poem, and not having like a preconceived idea. And she talks about writing beyond the edge of a poem, and writing beyond the edge of the page. So that is a kind of faith, isn't it? A trust in where you're going. It is fine. And I believe very strongly that when any of us are writing, it's the curiosity on the journey that's the most important thing, not having a fixed endpoint. So there's kind of a trust that you're going to get somewhere with what you're trying to write. And even if it's not in that particular poem, it might come out in a subsequent poem or several down the line.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, those of you who've been to my events before know that I believe that a poetry event should end on poetry. So before I invite Katie to read one last poem, thanks again to sorry, I've got my headphone is saying things that my battery's about to go low. So quickly, thank you to Angela behind the scenes at 9 Arches tonight, and to Jane Kemain for creating this event, to the poets Mary, Michelle, Matthew and Arji, and thank you to all of you listening and watching for being part of Katie's The Attitudes family tonight. Katie.
Thank you, Jill. The Attitudes. Insipid are the moon bathers, for their light spills in small places. Torrid are those who amass, for their trinkets will devour. Vapid are the earthmongers, for their deals trample the nest fallen. Rigid are those who embellish, for their fables will encrust. Sordid are the soul scammers, for their workday sees no dusk. Candid are those who lactate, for their largesse is passed on. Rapid are the water stabbers, for their targets leach away. Sacred are those who clamber, for their vertigo instructs. Intrepid are the scar gazers, whose bodies weep for an end. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and good night.